Spend the hour with Ta-Nehisi Coates. He grew up in Baltimore, and in Between the World and Me, he writes, quote, "To be black in Baltimore of my youth was to be naked before the elements of the world, before all the guns, fists, knives, crack, rape, and disease. The nakedness is not an error, nor pathology. The nakedness is the correct and intended result of policy, the predictable upshot of people forced for centuries to live under fear." Ta-Nehisi Coates is a national correspondent at The Atlantic, where he writes about culture, politics, and social issues. He received the George Polk Award for his Atlantic cover story, The Case for Reparations, which he joined us to discuss last May. His book, Between the World and Me, is called Required Reading by Toni Morrison, who writes, quote, "I've been wondering who might fill the intellectual void that plagued me after James Baldwin died. Clearly, it is Ta-Nehisi Coates." Well, Ta-Nehisi Coates, welcome back to Democracy Now! And congratulations on your book, Between the World and Me.
Thank you.
You write it as a letter to your son, Samari. Tell us why.
Well, I hate to disappoint you guys, but mostly as a literary technique. I began Between the World and Me after I finished the draft of The Case for Reparations, and I was actually somewhat frustrated with that piece because it's a very, very empirical piece, very much based in the tools of journalism, reportage, very, very evidence-based. But I thought at the same time it made what it meant to live under a system that made reparations essential in the first place abstract. There was a distancing effect about talking about people as numbers, about talking about people, across history. And what I wanted to do with this book is to give the reader some sense of what it meant to live under a system of plunder as an individual, to express that, to take it out of the realm of numbers and to take it directly into, individual people. How does it feel every day in your life to live under such a system? How do you cope with that? How is it warping? How is it perverse? What sort of effects does it ultimately have on you? And how do you, as much as possible, make your peace with it?
And you write also that the impact of the Ferguson decision, the grand jury's decision not to indict, had on your son, and the not distance it created, but your feeling that you couldn't really explain to him what had happened.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was. I think in a lot of situations like this, there is an immediate urge when our children have a reaction to something that has a racist component to it, to assure them somehow that everything will be okay, that there's some sort of justice that will win out in the end. And my study, my very elementary pedestrian autodidactic study of history does not demonstrate that to be true. My own life does not necessarily demonstrate that to be true. My belief is in the chaos of the world, and that you have to find your peace within the chaos, and that you still have to find some sort of mission. In the book, it's a dedication to the principle of struggle, even within the chaos, with no assurance that you will see any sort of victory within your lifetime.
Here is what I would like for you to know. In America, it's traditional to destroy the black body, its heritage.
Yeah, that just, as far as I'm concerned, is just a statement of fact, throughout the history. I was sitting here watching the Sandra Bland video, which I have avoided because I think, all of us, have our ways of coping, and sometimes it just becomes a little too much. But I was watching it here, and when you're in a situation where she was stopped for not signaling, I believe it is, when the powers that be, when the person who is armed with the ability, on behalf of the state to dispense lethal violence, decides to threaten someone with that lethal violence based on a turn signal, that's a statement on where we are. That's a statement on heritage. That's a statement on a whole set of beliefs that undergird that. Very, very disturbing. And unfortunately, those beliefs go back right to the founding of this country.
So you wrote a letter to your son. James Baldwin wrote a letter to his nephew.
Yes.
Toni Morrison said this is required reading and compares you to James Baldwin. The significance of this. You said hers was the only blurb you wanted.
Yeah. Well, in publishing, they do this thing where they just load you down with blurbs, and it's like 10 different people, who they try to find. They, festoon the book. And they managed to do that with Toni Morrison anyway, putting it on both sides. And I guess for me, the significance of that quote, that blurb for me, is Toni Morrison is somebody, you know, who has been, you know, such a figure in our community within Black literature for so long. Our greatest living American writer, I think, is a strong argument, you know, for that. I'm partial in some ways to E.O. Doctorow, who just left us last night, as it seems. But Toni Morrison, just, I mean, when you think about a figure who just represents what, you know, literature is in this country, and for Black people particularly, there was no one else. And this book is very much, I wrote it to be very much within the tradition of African American literature, with quotes from, you know, Sonia Sanchez, Amiri Baraka, Richard Wright, James Baldwin. That was, you know, how I situated the work. And so I am very appreciative, just very honored, you know, by our endorsement.
We're going to continue this conversation after break. Toni Morrison writes, "The language of Between the World and Me, like Coates' journey, is visceral, eloquent, and beautifully redemptive. And it's an examination of the hazards and hopes of Black male life, is as profound as it is revelatory." This is Democracy Now! We'll be back with Ta-Nehisi Coates in a minute.